be something which has real substance. Innovation research is not committed to quarter by quarter. Innovation research is a lifetime's commitment. Our investments in the Triangle date back to the early 1970s, with the big Glaxo investment coming in 1980. These are 20, 30, 40-year investments. We built those facilities knowing that nothing would come out in all likelihood for at least a decade. So you better have a level of commitment if you're going to embark on that kind of mission. That requires both sides to share that same vision, that same understanding. And I'm sure if we went outside of pharmaceuticals, you would have exactly the same discussion with high technology breakthrough industries of the type that many of you would like to have or already have in your parks. A shared sense of the mission, a shared sense of values is essential. What else is important? Well, from our side, what's critical is the big environment. I'm going to invest high technology research jobs in countries and states which support intellectual property. I'm not going to invest in countries and states which don't support intellectual property. It's fundamental to the creation of value. There is absolutely no point in pretending otherwise. It's critical. Intellectual property is a crucial dimension to securing long-term value creation from innovation. There will be no innovation without an intellectual property framework which not only stands in law, but also is enforced. A law which isn't enforced isn't worth anything. So intellectual property is a key precursor. That requires national government to be on board. Of course, science parks often are regional, state, sometimes national, but always subject to national laws and norms, and intellectual property adherence has to be something which exists at a national level. That's the first thing. The second part is talent. We're not going to invest in a science park where there isn't the talent. And that's where, again, RTP is a beautiful example of the perfect place to build a park. Between the three great universities, really allowing companies which invested here to come in and build on a talent base which already existed. So having a talent base is critical. What's also important within the talent base is that there are incentives for the talent base to transfer between sectors. So in situations where the talent sits within academia, but it is socially frowned on for academics to go native into industry, that's not going to be a very productive environment. Is enough being done to make the interface between industry and academia porous and two-way? I personally think that's an area where there is an enormous amount of work still to be done, even in some of the most advanced societies, including even in the US and certainly in Europe and in the UK, where I still believe there is significant academic snobbery which gets in the way of innovation transference from academic institution into industrial commercialization vehicles. And it's something which many governments are wrestling with, continue to struggle with. One of the key questions is, how do you reward your academics? Do you reward your academics by having the maximum number of publications, or do you reward them by the value of their discoveries in the marketplace? Very often it's by publication and not by valuation of discovery in the marketplace. Simple things like that drive behavior. And that's the kind of thing we need to work on. It's not good enough just to have the academic institutions. You have to have the mindset, the porous relationship, and I would argue a two-way transference of skills, industrialists going in, academics coming out, and making sure that we make that as blended as we possibly can. What else would we look for in this kind of environment? Well, the third is and I know this sounds completely obvious, a pro-innovation environment. Now, this is where, and not to extend Governor's religious analogies here with popes and cardinals, but I know I'm preaching to the choir when I talk about innovation and pro-innovation. But again, if you're looking for a high technology business to invest in your country or your park, and your government is running, I don't know, a buy local procurement initiative, or is running a buy cheapest initiative, then that's not creating a pro-innovation marketplace. And I'm afraid there are very many policymakers in the world, and this is where I'm going to ask your help to help influence them. There are very many policymakers in the world who do not believe that the market dynamic influences investment decisions. To invest in a country, in a science park, requires us to believe that the environment into which we invest is a pro-innovation, market-based environment where our people are going to feel like what they do is valued. If they see the very country in which they operate always choose the cheapest or always have a protectionist buy-in strategy, that is never going to be a place where you're going to be able to create long-term prosperity of a high-technology investment. So 3 very broad areas need to be in place: intellectual property, framework and enforcement, a talent base which is sufficiently dynamic and porous to academia, and finally, an assurance that innovation, that a marketplace exists for innovation. Those are 3 areas. Now, if I go down a couple of levels in terms of, well, let's get down to brass tacks. What do we really look for in a science park? Let's imagine those 3 things all exist. What do we really now start to look for? Well, that's an interesting choice because you see good and bad here. The good, Research Triangle Park. The bad, a nameless science park somewhere in the world that was built by real estate speculators in the hope that that was going to somehow create value. That's the worst, because the whole thing has been driven for all the wrong reasons. And it's really, we see a lot of this type of activity and talk of investment, parks being built, the parks very much the build it, they will come type of strategy. Build it and they will come will work, but it's more than bricks and mortar. It's the kind of thing you see here in North Carolina. It's the kind of thing you see in many other places of the world, but it's integration. By all means, build it, but build the software or focus on the software more than you focus on the hardware. It's the software that really is where the value sits. Second thing that I'd ask for is when you're a foreign investor, which by definition, a company like we will be, we were a foreign investor when we came here to North Carolina. I'd like to think now that we're partway to being a true citizen of North Carolina, and I hope one day we absolutely will be. To be a foreign investor is quite difficult sometimes to come along to a country and understand how to invest, even for the biggest companies. So the real service, and I'm going to hold Singapore, which is another government who I've got an extremely high regard for in this field, does a brilliant job. What Singapore does, and why Singapore has competed so well, not just in science parks, but in core industrial investment, is they provide a one-stop plug-and-play system for investors. If you want to figure out how to make something happen in Singapore, they provide a receptor for you to plug into that essentially gets it all done for you. Many other people do the same. I think personally it's essential. If you want to attract great investments, you have to make it easy. The very fact that we have 800 people in the room, and I'm guessing you don't represent every science park in the world, tells you how competitive this situation is. So having a plug-and-play capability to navigate all of the inevitable complexities of local society is tremendously important. The real challenge is whether your plug-and-play system works. So do you actually have receptors which have enough influence, power, capability, insight to orchestrate your system behind the scenes to make it work for the investor?